When we first got Hiraeth, how the deck was configured and how the lines ran didn't really work for us. So as part of the process of figuring out what was going to work best, we decided that we needed a new block at the foot of the mast to run the third reefing line through. So in this video, I'm going to show you how we installed a new deck fitting and rebedded the existing ones. Well, there's the story. Now let's get on with what you want to see. I've taken the headlining off in the saloon and removed the existing blocks that I'm going to refit. And I've needed to cut some of the tabbed in fiberglass away to clear space for a new backing plate that's going to spread the load for that new block. There are two sizes of blocks at the base of the mast, and the bolts for these are 6mm and 8mm wide. What I want to do is increase the hole size for each of these, so I can create a space between the bolt and the fiberglass and the core. This space is going to be filled with thickened epoxy resin, and it will help create a watertight seal between the deck and the bolt. I'm using a step cone drill bit for this, and this one ranges from 4 to 20mm in increments of 2mm. I find these are much more accurate when trying to open up the size of an existing hole, rather than just using a drill bit, as they don't skip around and you end up with the new larger hole dead centre. Also, if you drill all the way down to the start of the next step, it leaves a nice little bevel around the edge, and that helps to stop any chips or damage. Once I've opened up the neck of the hole to the size that I want it, 14mm in this case, I'm using a 14mm drill bit to continue drilling through. I'm using a wood drill bit here as the shape of it allows me to drill down to the backing plate and remove all the material in between, whereas a cone shaped one of a HSS drill bit wouldn't allow me to do this. I'm being careful to only drill down until I just touch the plate and not actually drill into it. I've also marked out where the new deck fitting is going to go and drilled out these oversized holes all the way through the deck, as there's no backing plate fitted there yet. We've now got all the holes drilled out to 14mm, and I've fitted that backing plate underneath where the new block's going to go. I've used a piece of 8mm thick aluminium plate cut to shape and epoxied it into place using resin thickened with colloidal silica. You can see the new plate sits flush next to the old one with the pre-existing 6mm and 8mm holes for the bolts to go through. I could have pre-drilled the new plate, but I didn't, so you get to see two ways to do it. The way for the new fitting is we've drilled the 14mm hole, removed some of the core material between the layers of fiberglass. The backing plate's been fitted and we're going to fill the hole in with thickened epoxy. Once it's cured, we'll drill the centre out to the correct size for the bolt. With the existing ones, we already have the backing plate fitted with the bolts drilled, and again we're going to remove some of the core material, but this time we're going to temporarily fit the bolt from underneath and backfill around this. The epoxy will cure around the thread of the bolt and create more purchase and an overall better seal. So the new backing plate's on, and I've already filled the holes for where the new deck fitting's going to sit. I've covered it up and left it to cure overnight. I just need to quickly cover the underside up again so I can catch any crap that might fall down into the boat. I'm going to remove some of the wooden core between the deck, and for this I'm just using a little grinding wheel on the Dremel. If you have a foam or balsa wood core, you can use an Allen key or a bent piece of thick wire, but the plywood's a bit heavy here for that, and although this isn't perfect, it's what I have to hand and it'll do the job. All we're trying to do here is to grind away some of that core material, so the epoxy sits in between the layers of fiberglass and forms a plug that can't easily be pulled out. I don't have a figure for exactly how much would be perfect to remove here, but for a hole this size, I'm happy with removing about 5 to 10mm. After a quick vacuum to get any bits of loose wood and fiberglass out, we can start to line the sides of those holes with some unthickened epoxy and to get it to soak into that wooden core before I start to backfill it in. Before I do that though, I'm going to fit that new deck block. I'm sanding the top of the cured epoxy nice and flat so I can mark it and the drill bit doesn't skip. You can probably see that one of the holes is a touch less than full, and this has probably happened due to an air bubble getting trapped in as I filled the hole in, and the epoxy's settled and sank as it's been curing. There's nothing to worry about here, as I'm going to bevel the top of it anyway, but you could just always sand the top and fill it up if it was a little bit too deep. I'm using the base of the fitting as a template to keep the new 6mm holes as central as possible in that 14mm epoxy plug. I have a HSS drill bit fitted this time, as I'm going through the epoxy and then straight through the aluminium backing plate too. Okay, so now we've got the new fitting in place. I've put some masking tape over the underside of the existing holes so I don't drip epoxy all over the floor. I'm using a small brush here to paint the inside of the holes with unthickened epoxy, and this is going to soak into the core and help make a watertight seal and help the thickened epoxy fill a bond better. You can just fill the hole up completely and leave it for a few minutes and then remove the tape and let the excess drip out the bottom, but I find it a bit messy like that and it wastes epoxy unnecessarily. These blocks all deflect the loads at a 90-degree angle and there can be quite a lot of force on them, so I decided to upgrade the bolts that I'm refitting to an A4 80 grade stainless steel, and these are slightly stronger than the standard 70 grade. Although the term strength can be relative and it's not always necessarily better, as sometimes you prefer something to give a little rather than just snap, but in this case the tensile strength of the bolts is greater and they also have a better anti-corrosion property. I've just given them a quick spray with some silicone based lubricant, and this will act as a release agent as I want to be able to easily remove them again once the resin's cured. Sally's underneath and she's removed the tape and wiped away any excess resin. I've mixed some epoxy resin and thickened it with a high density filler, and I have it in the syringe here. Although if you're careful you could just use a small plastic bag and cut the corner off.
Okay, next.
She's pushed the bolt through from underneath and I'm injecting the epoxy in as she slowly turns the bolt clockwise. This will screw the resin down to the bottom and help prevent any air bubbles like we saw earlier.
Okay, next.
I obviously want these bolts to cure in the middle of the hole, so I'm going to fit the base of the fitting over the top so the holes can sit central.
Okay.
To stop everything from sticking together, I'm using a few stack washers just to stand the base of the fitting away from the resin as it cures.
Sitting it on.
With the bases all on now, I'm just nipping them up slightly so they don't accidentally move before it all hardens. Right, well they're all set now, so I can crack the bolts off and remove them before getting the blocks back on and getting them fully fitted. I've sanded the epoxy flush to the deck, and I'm using a countersink drill bit to add a small bevel to the top of the hole. This small recess is going to hold the sealant around the top of the bolt and help create that watertight bond. For the sealant, I'm going to be using my trusty old friend butyl tape. The reason I'm using this is that these blocks are going to take a fair amount of load, and some movement around the base is almost inevitable. Even though Sikaflex has an amount of elasticity to it and it's great for some jobs, it does set firm, and using it or another brand of sealant means that if that chemical bond gets broken, the seal will never be watertight again. You can try and tighten it down further with the bolts to force it together, but there's nothing new there to stick to either surface, so ultimately you're going to need to remove the fitting, clean it and rebed it with new sealant. Where using butyl tape, you're using its property of not setting to your advantage. Here we've got the fitting bolted down already, so the adhesion of any sealant is not really doing jack shit. And by using a non-setting sealant, it'll allow for that tiny amount of movement and also provide a seal that constantly rebonds to the adjacent surfaces. And if for some reason there is water ingress, you just need to slightly retighten the bolts and voila, you have two bonded surfaces again. We've fitted the blocks and the nuts underneath, and after letting it settle for 24 hours, we'll retighten it all up and trim off any butyl tape that's squeezed out. This is the installation a while later, all cleaned up and with the deck now painted in kiwi grip, and after I refitted every winch, block and other deck fitting in the exact same way. And not that we had any to begin with, but not a single leak to date. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. It'll be the last refit one for a while as we're off sailing the west coast of Scotland, so subscribe if you want the YouTube algorithm to randomly decide if it wants to show you any more of our videos, or check out our homepage for our other boat repairs and sailing adventures.